Uh, Paul, thank you very much indeed. And it's very nice not to see you all, so to speak. Under normal circumstances, I would have been standing on my own 2 feet in the Cruising Association tonight. So we all know the reasons I can't do that. But it does mean that a great deal of us, a great number of us, can come together from all different clubs to talk about this fascinating subject, which is called ocean sailing. And I'm particularly grateful to the RIN for the invitation. It so happens that a great friend of mine, the late Mike Ritchie, Mike was director of the Royal Institute of Navigation from, I think, something like 1948 to 1982 or 83. And Mike was a supreme navigator. I remember him very, very fondly. In the 1950s and 60s, if you wanted to win the Fastnet race, you had to have Mike navigating. He cut his teeth shepherding convoys from Plymouth to the D-Day landing beaches, which he had to do on dead reckoning. And that charms you up somewhat. Although he did tell me that he was doing it one night and the Germans forgot to switch off the light on the end of the Cherbourg breakwater, and so he took running fixes on that. But he was a great ocean sailor. He'd done 13 single-handed crossings of the Atlantic in a 26-foot folk boat, the last one at the age of 80. And he said to me once, well, I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and a ship came up to see if I was okay, which was very nice of them. And the man came on the radio and he said, would you like me to give you your position? And I said to him, what makes you think that your position is any more accurate than mine? Mike was, just that kind of very proud professional navigator. And so I just, in this context here at RIN, I paid tribute to him tonight. Now we're going to talk about this fascinating subject, which is called ocean sailing. Paul has briefly outlined the little bit I've done. I don't claim a vast amount of knowledge, but I do claim some experience. When you go down, take my Cape Horn trip, for example, that was 18,000 miles round trip. I did 11,000 of those miles on my own, and the longest stretch I was alone at sea on my own was 62 days. And so you pick up one or two things about the whole business, well, on a little venture like that, and I'll share some of them with you. But this talk tonight springs from a book which I was asked to write. You can see it there. It is called Ocean Sailing. I was approached by the Pilotage Foundation, the Royal Cruising Club's Pilotage Foundation, which is the charitable arm of the club, who publish pilot books, which a lot of commercial publishers wouldn't have an interest in. Channel and France and the Mediterranean, you can sell pilot books for places like that. But someone has to pick up the other pieces, the bits of the world where so few people go, but where pilot books are essential. I'm thinking of the Philippines. I'm thinking of the Beagle Channel, the coast of West Africa. These are places that very, very few people go. And the charitable aim of the Pilotage Foundation is to provide information on these places. And I recommend their website strongly to you. But they said to me, they said, we want a book about ocean sailing, a sort of companion for people who want to go ocean sailing and aren't quite certain how to go about it. And I said, well, I'm just not the right person for this, because I've done my various trips. I always come away thinking, whoa, I got away with that one. So I don't claim any great expertise or knowledge. So I went away to think about it, and then I thought, well, I'll tell you what's missing from the vast library of books on ocean sailing. Nobody tells you what it feels like. People are very ready to draw lists of, essential medicines and essential stores for the galley and how to hoist spinnakers and how to reef mainsails and all that kind of thing. But no one tells you what it's like. What is the experience of ocean sailing? What are you letting yourself in for? What is it going to be like? So I decided I would write a book about those themes. Now, as I said, my experience is somewhat limited. And so I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to consult the three great cruising clubs which have a worldwide coverage. And that would be the Royal Cruising Club, the Cruising Club of America, and the Ocean Cruising Club. And what I did was to contact members over a period of time to get and ask them to share their experience with me. And that is what I consider to be the meat of the book. Now, before we get into it, I just want to, 4 things. If I don't get these 4 things across tonight, I shall go away kicking myself. So I'm going to get them out of the way. Number 1, if you are taking crew, under no circumstances let them book return air tickets. Don't even let them think about it. If necessary, go through their bags and their wallets and their handbags, and if they've got return air tickets, tear them up. Because as soon as someone has a return air ticket, particularly for a long ocean passage, then you are suddenly sailing to someone else's timetable. And that can produce the most incredible friction on a boat and frustration, and I suppose to a certain extent danger. If you're racing across the Atlantic to catch a plane, it's such a stupid idea. Don't let anybody buy a return air ticket. The other important thing, which it's easy to forget, but let me tell you, don't worry about the weather. I worry about the weather. I've given up now. I used to worry a lot about the weather. But people who do ocean sailing all the time, people who are, they circumnavigate and then they get, I quite like that, I'll go and do it again. They really don't worry about the weather. You might get, struck by a storm or a tempest or whatever, but you'll have thought what you're going to do, and 99 times out of 100 you will come through it. It might not be a very nice experience, but you will come through it. But there is an interesting statistic which was produced by a woman called Beth Leonard, who wrote a lot of books about ocean cruising, an American lady who sailed with her husband, and they did hundreds of thousands of miles and came up with what I thought was an amazing statistic, that in all their sea miles, for 75% of the time, there was too little wind rather than too much. So I think that's a very optimistic thought. So, don't worry about the weather. Buy one of these. Buy yourself a sextant. Not because you're going to get lost. Not because the GPS is going to let you down, because it won't. Because you've probably got more of them than you know. I mean, I run what I call quite a simple boat, and by the time I'd counted up the mobile phone, the iPad, the laptop, the plotter, the EPIRB, this, that, and the other, I think I got about 8 GPSs on board. The reason for buying a sextant is because for long periods of time, ocean sailing can be really very, very boring. If you get yourself into a weather system where you can just set the sails and keep going for day after day after day, you get through a massive number of books. You go through endless playlists on your device. You've heard all the music 3 times over, and you think, what the hell am I going to do next? Get the sextant out. If you want a real challenge, if you've got an evening and you're not quite certain what to do that evening because the boat's going well and nothing needs fixing, everything's fine, try doing a moon sight crossed with a star or a planet sight. And then you'll be very busy for many hours, and it'll be midnight before you know where you are. So as a distraction device, a sextant is of enormous use. And there is another very big secret to ocean sailing, which nobody tells you. And I will, but at the end, and you might have to remind me. So I contacted all these people to get their take on what ocean sailing is about and how they do it and so on and so forth. And I wanted to get a feel for the satisfactions of it. And so I turned to Tom and Vicky Jackson. Tom and Vicky have done, I'm reading here now, 200,000 miles in their cruising career in a 50-year-old sloop. Don't let anyone tell you you've got to have the latest kit. They've got a 50-year-old, by modern standards, quite a basic piece of machinery, but boy, has it served them well. 200,000 miles. And at the very beginning of the book, I asked them to describe for me what for them ocean sailing is all about. And let me just read this to you. For us, passage making is about two people sailing and living close together, relying on and supporting each other. It is about full moons, big horizons, the starry sky, colourful sunsets, soft-hued sunrises, dolphins playing in the bow wave, a wandering albatross soaring and swooping over the wave tops. But it is also about dark, squally clouds, a tropical downpour, frightening bolts of lightning, a ship not changing course. The pace of life is slow. Time passes, but is unimportant. In many ways, it hardly exists. Days and nights go by. Slowly, a small yacht on a big ocean does get closer to its destination. Now, I sort of think really that kind of sentiment you ought to try to, tattoo across your heart and just come back to it. It's terribly easy. I thought all the traps that I'm describing are the ones that I've fallen into. You're making great lists of nuts and bolts and have I got a spare hammer? Have I got a spare this? And actually, you forget why you are doing it and what is at the very heart of taking a boat from one side of the ocean to another. So I thought they set the theme beautifully for the book. It's slightly romantic, but ocean sailing is about romance. If you haven't got a bit of romance in your soul, I don't think you're going to find it a great experience. And it's a shame just to reduce it to a level of technical complexity, jumping from waypoint to waypoint and this, you know what I mean. It's a shame just to miss out on the romance. So I would say just keep that somewhere in your hearts if you can. Now, one question that I don't think a lot of people seriously ask themselves is, where shall I go? Which is the title of the first chapter. I've met a lot of people who I fall into conversation with who say, "Oh, I would love to do, we'd love to do, sort of saying that you do and sort of saying that other people do." And I said, "Oh, where do you want to go?" Well, we thought we'd go down to the Canaries, and then then we can go across the Atlantic, and then one of them will say, "Well, yeah, we'll go through the Suez Canal, yeah, the Pacific Canal, fantastic." And the other one says, "Oh no, well, we could go up to Greenland. Actually, Greenland's very nice. Greenland's a very interesting place," and they don't see any difference between the two. They think they can just get on the ocean and go wherever they want. And of course, it's not like that. The key thing, I think, is knowing what kind of experience you want. If it is your dream to see the Pacific Islands, then it's quite straightforward. You know what you've got to do. You know roughly the direction you're going to go. But if you just have a vague idea of being on the ocean is just going to be fun, I think you might quickly find that it's not always fun. And so to get a good, solid idea of what you want to do and what you want to try and achieve, my first piece of advice is to start a library. Honestly, start a library. Don't buy a boat, buy some books. You can have them on a tablet or whatever, but just learn the language of ocean sailing. Learn to read charts, wind pilot charts in particular. Learn to read wind roses, know your doldrums from the horse latitudes and the difference between the roaring 40s and the furious 50s, and just learn to love the trade winds, because they are going to be your friend. Learn to love the trade winds and the ocean currents. What's the point in fighting these things? You're not going out there to do battle. It's not like a race. Yeah, if you're doing a race, that's a battle. That's supposed to be a battle. Ocean sailing isn't a battle. Yeah, you learn to hate the cyclones and the hurricanes and the typhoons, but you need to know where they're going to occur and at what time of year. And that knowledge takes some time to acquire and to sink in. You can't just look it all up once you've set off. You've got to have a feel for it. So I would start with the library. A very good cruising couple, Debbie Dennis and Jack Martin. They set off on a circumnavigation in their Olsen 38. And this is what they said to me. They said, we put, quotes, every hour and every dollar into the planning. It's hard to say exactly how much time, but it was a lot. For the last 3 months, both of us probably spent 20 to 30 hours a week making lists, purchasing supplies, and preparing ourselves. Many sailors shared their experience with us in countless conversations on docks, at boat shows, on the telephone, and through email. Our sailing library, this is the point, had over 75 books, many of them from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, which were more in line with the vintage of our boat. I don't know if any of you know of, or are fans of, or have heard of Eric Hiscock. Eric Hiscock and his wife Susan more or less invented circumnavigation in yachts for what you might call ordinary couples, and they wrote some books which are just stuffed with useful things you ought to know, even down to how to make chips. That's in there somewhere. But they wrote 2 books, which are cruising under sail and particularly voyaging under sail. And of course, a lot of the stuff is outdated. You don't have to worry about sisal ropes going rotten, or canvas, cotton canvas sails ripping, or any of that kind of stuff anymore. But there are just little gems, and there's a lot of aspects to ocean sailing which haven't changed for centuries, and you need to be able to grasp those. And books are possibly the best way to gather that information. Let me quote from Kevin and Teresa Rusco. Now, they were beginners. They were complete beginners. They went off into the South Atlantic to head for the Falkland Islands. They had an Oyster 42. And on their own admission, they didn't all know all that much when they set off. And they said, as regards planning, there is a wealth of information in books such as Cornell's World Cruising Routes. They're dead right about that. And the RCC Atlantic Crossing Guide and the Pacific Crossing Guide. But we referred mostly to the Admiralty Ocean Passages for the World. In particular, there's a detailed guidance on how and where to cross the doldrums, depending on the season. We followed that guidance to the letter and was regarded with an excellent close reach in the southeast trades. One task I had not expected to engage in was some serious blind tasting of tea bags. We set off with a lot of tea bags, about a hammock full, and with that much tea, I wanted to be happy with my choice. I eventually settled on Assam. So you see, there's 2 couples on very different kinds of boats, and achieved exactly what they set out to achieve in 2 very different kinds of ocean sailing. And the success of it was clearly based on a lot of the research that they've done, and by reading books. Just read as many books as you can, and don't only read the ones about how to survive storms, because it'll just depress you. One other thought, and this was the next question that arose when I was writing this book, was, is there such a thing as a perfect boat for ocean sailing? Or in some ways, this is almost the most difficult aspect of ocean sailing that you have to consider, the boat itself. A lot of people will go out and buy something brand new. I would say that was a mistake. I bought, it wasn't a brand new boat, but it was brand new to me, and set off less than a year later to go down the South Atlantic. It was a terrible mistake, because I got as far as Lisbon, and I suddenly sort of realized, actually, I don't know this boat inside out in the way that I should. When you've had a boat for a long time, you know every little rattle, every little noise, and you know instantly when something is not quite right. It takes time. It takes time to have that kind of affinity with a boat, and you can't rush it, unless it's obviously ridiculously unsuitable. There's a lot of truth in the expression that the best boat is the boat that you have. Because then you will know its ways. If you are going to change boats and get one specifically for it, just build time into your plans just to get to know it. 2 or 3 weeks of channel sailing will not do it. You have to go out there and you've got to test the boat and know every nook and every cranny of it. Annie Hill is an interesting character. Excuse me. Annie Hill is one of the most remarkable cruising yachtsmen of our age. She sails very simply, very basically, but there is hardly anywhere in the world that she has not been. She and Pete Hill wrote a book called Sailing on a Budget. If you're thinking of doing it on a budget, read that book. Annie Hill, Sailing on a Budget. I asked her about what she thought was the perfect boat for ocean sailing. She said, "Keep it simple and tread lightly on the planet. To me, one of the great joys of sailing is one's proximity to nature, which is why I prefer a smaller boat. I like the boat to look after me in return for a minimal input. Simplicity makes this easier to achieve. When I arrive somewhere new after a few weeks at sea, I want to go ashore and explore. I don't want to have to attend to the jobs list. If your boat has systems, it's too complex. But I'm very happy to make use of modern technology to keep the boat from leaking and having ropes and sails that last longer. If you have a sound, simple boat, you should easily be able to voyage on less than £100 a week. With practice, on less. And if you're really motivated, perhaps £50 a week would do. If you don't think, listen to this very carefully, if you don't think you can afford a large enough boat, buy a smaller one. People have circumnavigated in boats under 20 feet and thoroughly enjoyed themselves." Well, I asked around, and I said, "Well, what would you say was the perfect boat?" And someone said to me, "Can you love it? You have to be able to love your boat." And they said that love, of course, comes from experience and not from character. I thought that was quite interesting. Most people agreed that there was actually a sweet spot. I mean, Annie's an extreme case, but there's a sweet spot somewhere between 35 and 45 feet. And we're not going to get into debates tonight about hull forms and keels and rudders and multi-hulls and unstayed rigs and junk rigs and all that kind of stuff. You can have those debates elsewhere. But I distilled from what all those people said to me, just a list, and I'll take you through it now as bullet points. Pointing ability isn't important. Ocean sailors choose their routes to maximize downwind sailing. That's true. That's true. I was once in a harbour in Norway, and a quite elderly American came in their boat alongside, and we were chatting. And I said to them, they'd come from California, they'd been all the way around the Pacific, around Cape Horn, up the Atlantic, they'd end up in Norway. And I said, does your boat point well? And they said they didn't know because they'd never tried. They just cracked off the wind. If the wind was heading them, they just cracked off until it was comfortable. And they said, the wind never stays in the same direction for very long, and you always get there. So I thought that was quite comforting. Don't get hung up on passage times. In other words, speedy boats aren't the most important thing. Comfort matters more than that. Long-keeled traditional boats have a narrower beam and don't have the space that a flat-floored modern boat has, but the motion at sea is much easier, so you can debate that. They don't slam upwind, and they can heave to quite well. Short-keeled boats, in the opinion of a lot of people, are an attempt to blend racing with cruising yachts, and both suffer. Edward said that was right. Spade rudders have a near vertical trailing edge, which is good for moving around in marinas, but they're vulnerable and you can't let go of them. I know the feeling. Bulb keels are more prone to picking up lines and nets. Don't buy a boat, and pay the inevitable maintenance bills along the way. Which sort of takes me on to the next chapter, which is how much does it actually cost to go ocean sailing? You can fret for a long time doing the numbers, and it does cost it. I mean, there's no there are no two ways about it. But someone quoted at me Mark Twain: 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by $1,000 a month to be able to cruise comfortably. And there are some people who manage it on $10 a day, and so you've got to decide how you're going to play it. Chris Cromie and Suzanne Hill's great. This is how they did it, because they were working on a very, very strict budget. We had a period of 2.5 years between making the decision to go cruising and actually casting off, and use this period for not only saving but also ruthlessly selling on eBay everything that we wouldn't be taking with us. We lived on board during this time to minimize living costs and to accelerate the selling process. We didn't want to end up in the situation of having to stop somewhere partway through the voyage to fly home to work. The decision to go cruising came before the boat. We were both savers anyway, and the bank balance wasn't too bad. Not being big spenders, we'd spent the years from university to our late 30s working in professional jobs, but still largely living on a student budget, from making our own lunch to buying second-hand whenever we could. Keep everything as simple as possible. There's an endless array of equipment out there, but much of it's superfluous. Make sure you've checked off the essential navigation and safety equipment for ocean cruising, have the spare parts needed for the boat, and a good set of tools. Beyond that, it's simply filling the boat with food, water, gas, and diesel supplies. There is a theme emerging here, isn't there, I think it's a very important one, of handling complexity and not getting sucked in to over complexity, either in planning or fitting out your boat. There was a time when the marina there in Gran Canaria was stuffed with people waiting for spares being flown out from England. We're waiting for a new spare for the fridge. They say it'll be with us in 2 months. You don't get that so much these days. But what you do get is, oh, no, we can't leave till Thursday because we're waiting for a software update. So things have changed. If you've got complexity, then it's easy for complexity to run away with you. And I think that is a theme. I wanted to pose the question, 2 questions really, about the age spectrum. Is it fair to take kids with you? And is it ever too late to go? In other words, are you too old to go ocean sailing? Let's deal with the kids first. I met a very cool French couple in Ushuaia in the Beagle Channel when I was down there. And I knew they were French because hanging from the gantry at the back of the boat, which is a very modest boat, were some sausages, which they made themselves, and there was a considerable amount of garlic. It actually smelled fantastic. But this is what they were doing. They were making and curing their own sausages, because the air down there is very, very dry, because it's largely Antarctic air. And they were hanging. Anyway, he spoke a little English, and I was chatting to him over the rail, and I suddenly heard below gurglings, clearly of a baby. I thought perhaps they got the radio on or something like that. Isn't that a baby down there? And he said, oh, yeah, it's a baby. Oh, how old is it? You know, and like any proud father, he knew 3 weeks and 4 days. You've just flown out with the 3? No. We had the baby on board. And they had spent the entire winter in this quite small boat, the entire winter in the Chilean canals. They came down to Ushuaia when the baby was due, and it just so happens that from the pontoons in Ushuaia, it's actually quite a short walk across to the hospital. So when the time came, they just got off the boat, trotted up to the hospital, had the baby, came back. I said, what are you going to do for the rest of the season? And they said, oh, cruise the rest of the Beagle Channel. So you can start at quite a young age if you're as hard as those two. Not everyone is, but there are some quite hardy people around. And Jessica Lloyd Mostyn, they've done 25,000 miles so far with 2 babies. And she says, boat kids are a great advertisement for the benefits of sailing with children. Cruising children are generally friendly, conversational, undaunted by interaction with other adults, and relatively hardy. Without exception, children we've met whilst cruising have looked us in the eye when we speak. And I thought that was very telling. But I did decide when writing this chapter that the parents might think one thing and the children might think another. And so I got the view of a 7-year-old, which I think is quite interesting. 7-year-old girl writes, I remember quite a complicated selection process about which cuddly toys I should take with me, including which can swim and which will all fit into my bed at once. Having done this, my bunk was half full of cuddlies, and I had a large picture frame containing photos of me, my friends, and my brownie group. Saying goodbye to my friends was very easy, as I knew I was coming back. I don't think I had any thought of time, and I thought it was just going to be a really long holiday. However, saying goodbye to my dog, Kendall, was very difficult. As we had him since I was 4, he and I had grown up together, and he was a best friend and a brother. It was fine once we got to sea. So there you are. If you're thinking of taking children with you, perhaps that will hearten you. And there are many other tales in the book similar to that. I could not find anyone who'd taken their children to sea and ended up regretting it. Not to suggest that it was a joyride every inch of the way, but on balance, they all came back thinking, yes, it was the right thing to do. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, are you ever too old to go? Eric Forsyth says not. Eric, who's still sailing at the age of 80, has been sailing for 50 years. He's done 27 transatlantic passages, 2 circumnavigations, and interestingly, you see, it's all in a boat that he's owned since 1983. The boat is effectively an extension of himself. He says everyone ages at a different rate. Persons of 80 can be more spry than someone of 60. One advantage that age gives you is the benefit of experience, provided that you started sailing early enough. With proper planning, the financial position of older people can be more stable than when you're younger, unless, of course, you are both born rich. I have noticed, when comparing, that many crew members that I've sailed with, the stamina to keep going under difficult circumstances often seems to improve with age. And then the Lymans, they did a 3 circumnavigation in their 70s. I try to geriatric the boat every year to make it easier to accomplish the important tasks. This could include a winch to bring the outboard on board, or creating a step to make it easier to go below. Little things can be significant. I recently had a bow thruster, something I thought I would never do. If I was advising an older person who wanted to take up ocean sailing, I would say, don't go too big. Keep the boat a reasonable size to be easier to handle, and then the problems are slower to develop. I've noticed that older couples tend to go for larger boats and more comfort, but can end up unhappy trying to stay ahead of the maintenance. If I had to pass on one piece of wisdom, it would be, rewarding adventure is not always to be found where most cruising yachts hang out. If there is a VHF net, do not stay long. So some good stuff there from Eric Forsyth, who is still at it. Published a book of his own, which might well be worth a read. Eric Forsyth. The whole business of keeping in touch when you're ocean sailing, keeping in touch with the folks back home is an interesting one, and throws up one or two questions which you need to ask yourself. Is it a good thing or not that everyone knows where you are all the time? That's easy to achieve these days with trackers, satellite phones, and all the rest of it. But if the tracker goes on the blink and the sat phone doesn't work, and all these things are quite likely to happen, what are you doing to the people back home who are waiting to hear from you? It is so easy to jump to the wrong conclusion. There was a classic example, I think it was in the last OSTAR, when some parents were very carefully following their son who was taking part in the race. And, you know, all these races now have a website where you can see the position. But the position is only updated once every X number of hours. And so they went on the website and, oh dear, he was pointing towards home. He was doing one and nothing. What the heck had happened? Nothing had happened. What had happened is, at the instant that the machine sent its bleep, giving his course and direction and speed and all the rest of it, he'd luffed up to change sails. So he was sitting there in the water quite happy. Meanwhile, back home, his folks were very witless. So you've got to make a decision really about how much of this stuff you can carry, because it's now so complex, so sophisticated, and it all has a global reach, but it comes with its downsides. Also, the whole business of being the boat's engineer as well as communications officer, you know, you're going to have to be in command of the toolbox like you've never been in command of a toolbox before. And if you're not very good at those things, boy, you've got to learn something before you go. You have to be the bosun, you have to be the engineer, you have to be the electrician, you have to be the rigger, you have to be all these things, and this is experience that is hard won. I invented a little game actually, which you might want to have a go at this Christmas. This is my Christmas present to you. All right, you've got to be at home and in a relaxed frame of mind, and then you get a pile of postcards, and on that pile of postcards, you write one thing on each postcard, and it's the name of a bit of kit: water maker, primary winch, windlass, heads, all those things. And then you put the cards in a heap on the table. Someone takes one. Let's say it's water maker. The person next to you then comes up with the fault that's occurred. Like the water maker is pumping out salt water instead of fresh. Happy days. And the next person has to tell you how they would fix it, and you two give them marks out of 10 for how well they do. And you know, you can play that game endlessly. You can break the windlass, you can lose the jib. I don't even bust the main halyard. It's just a way of thinking through all these problems in advance, and just having you. And you know, you don't know what's going to come of it, but you might just get out there and the water maker does start pumping out saline instead of fresh water. And you think, I remember what George said that night we did all this around the kitchen table. So, yeah, you never know. It's 7:30, so we must move on to, I think I'll move on to the last chapter before we do some questions. And in a way, this is the most poignant one, because this is a subject area that has, I don't think, ever been tackled before, and it was revealing. And that is, you've been through all the preparations, you've set off, you've had the time of a life, which you will never ever forget. But what is it like when it's all over? What is the moment like when you step off the boat and back into your old life? And I don't think people think too much about that in advance. But, you know, forewarned is forearmed. Here's some. I'm just going to plant these thoughts in your head. Just carry them with you. Think about it. Because how you end your great voyage regards from paradise. Even your nearest and dearest will not necessarily want to hear too many details about your adventures. Don't expect to be the returning heroes for more than about 5 minutes. But over time, they'll come to ask more questions, so don't lose heart if they seem pretty disinterested at first. And just to go back to what Eric, after the tranquility of an ocean passage, getting home can be hectic. You will crave the peace and quiet of the boat. And here we are. This is quite interesting. I found London, my home city, overwhelming at times. The crowds, the pace, the seeming lack of engagement. We established a routine of morning walks and were struck by how shy English people are. We'd become accustomed to offering a smile and a friendly greeting to all and sundry. Back in England, people would look down or look away and hardly raise a cheer. Thank goodness for friendly dogs. So there you are. That's in a nutshell, what this book called Ocean Sailing is all about. And I hope you've picked up something useful from it, and we can now spend 10-15 minutes answering questions. But I did promise you the one big secret of ocean sailing, which no one tells you, so I am going to tell you. It is this. Are you listening? Ocean sailing is so damned easy. You don't worry about the tides. There are no headlands. There's no rocks. There's no harbour master 2 or 3 hours away. There's no marina to joggle around. You're just out there having the time of your life, and it is so damned easy. And if you get into a situation where you think, hang on, this is not easy at all, actually look up, see the big picture. Ocean sailing is really not all that difficult. As that man used to say on the radio, if you've been listening, thank you.